In the world of military precision, where millimeters can mean the difference between life and death, there exists a shot that defied every rule in the sniper's handbook. Picture this: 12 of the world's most elite marksmen, each with decades of experience, each with confirmed kills that would make your blood run cold, all standing before the same impossible target. One by one, they lined up their crosshairs, controlled their breathing, and squeezed the trigger. One by one, they failed. The target wasn't moving, the weather conditions were stable. These weren't rookie mistakes or equipment failures. These were the best of the best, and yet something about this particular shot seemed to mock the very foundations of their expertise. The angle was wrong. The physics didn't add up. The mathematics of ballistics suggested it simply couldn't be done. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But then she stepped forward. A woman whose name has been classified, whose face remains hidden from public records, whose very existence challenges everything we thought we knew about the limits of human precision. She was younger than most of the men who had failed before her. She had fewer confirmed kills on her record. By every measurable metric, she should have been the least likely to succeed. Yet when she pulled that trigger, physics bent to her will. This isn't just a story about marksmanship. This is a story about the moment when human intuition transcends mathematical certainty, when years of training crystallize into a single, impossible moment of perfection. This is the story of a shot that shouldn't have been possible, attempted by someone who shouldn't have been able to make it, in conditions that defied every convention of sniper doctrine. The setting was a classified military facility somewhere in the Nevada desert, where the world's most elite special forces units were conducting joint training exercises. Representatives from Delta Force, Navy SEALs, British SAS, German GSG-9, Russian Spetsnaz, and half a dozen other units had gathered for what was supposed to be routine marksmanship evaluation. These weren't ordinary soldiers. These were the ghosts who operated in the shadows, the invisible hands that shaped global conflicts from distances measured in kilometers. The challenge had started as a friendly competition, the kind of testosterone-fueled rivalry that emerges when alpha operators from different nations find themselves in the same space. Someone had spotted a target through the facility's observation windows, a small metallic disc, roughly the size of a silver dollar, positioned on a distant hillside at an elevation that created an almost vertical shooting angle. The distance wasn't extraordinary by sniper standards. At 847 meters, it fell well within the effective range of their weapon systems. What made the shot impossible wasn't the distance. It was the geometry. The target sat at the bottom of a narrow ravine, accessible only through a gap between two massive rock formations that created what ballistics experts call a keyhole shot. The bullet would need to thread through an opening barely wider than the projectile itself, then curve downward at an angle that seemed to violate the laws of trajectory mechanics. The first sniper to attempt the shot was Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a Delta Force operator with over 200 confirmed kills across 3 different combat zones. He spent 47 minutes calculating wind speed, barometric pressure, humidity levels, and trajectory compensation. His rifle, a custom-modified Barrett M82A1, had been zeroed to perfection just hours earlier. When he fired, the bullet impacted 6 inches to the left of the keyhole opening, embedding itself in solid granite. The second attempt came from Sergeant Major Thompson, a British SAS veteran whose precision had earned him the nickname One Shot among his peers. Thompson's approach was methodical, clinical. He factored in the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth itself, adjusting his scope with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. His bullet made it through the keyhole opening, but struck the ravine wall 18 inches above the target. One by one, they tried. Each marksman brought their own philosophy, their own technique, their own understanding of the science behind the shot. Some relied on technology, using laser rangefinders and ballistic computers that could calculate trajectories down to the nanometer. Others trusted their instincts, feeling for the wind patterns and reading the subtle signs that experience had taught them to recognize. The German representative, Obergreifreiter Klaus Müller, attempted to compensate for the unusual angle by adjusting his firing position, nearly hanging upside down from a secured rope to align his rifle barrel with what he calculated to be the optimal trajectory path. His shot came closer than any before it, missing the target by less than 4 inches. As the day wore on, frustration began to mount. These were men accustomed to success, to the absolute certainty that their skills could overcome any challenge, yet here was a target that seemed to exist in defiance of their expertise. Theories were proposed and discarded. Equipment was checked and rechecked. Some began to question whether the shot was physically possible at all. By late afternoon, 12 attempts had been made. 12 failures had been recorded. The target remained untouched, gleaming mockingly in the desert sun like a challenge issued by the universe itself to the entire concept of human precision.
The atmosphere in the observation room had shifted from competitive banter to something approaching obsession. What had begun as a casual display of marksmanship skills had evolved into something much deeper, a fundamental challenge to the identity of these elite operators. These men had built their careers, their very sense of self, around their ability to place a bullet exactly where they intended. Now, faced with a target that refused to yield, some were beginning to question everything they thought they knew about their craft. Colonel James Mitchell, the American officer overseeing the training exercise, had initially planned to call off the challenge after the 6th failed attempt. The mathematical analysis was clear. The shot required the bullet to maintain a trajectory that violated established ballistic principles. The angle of descent needed to thread the keyhole opening was so steep that it approached the theoretical maximum deflection achievable through conventional rifling. Even with perfect conditions, the probability of success hovered somewhere near statistical impossibility. But something about the challenge had captured the imagination of every sniper present. These were men who lived for the impossible shot, who measured their worth in yards and inches, in the space between heartbeats where life and death decisions played out in fractions of seconds. To walk away now would be to admit defeat not just to a target, but to the universe's apparent declaration that there existed limits they could not transcend. The Russian representative, Senior Lieutenant Viktor Petrov, had approached the shot with characteristic, methodical precision. Petrov was a veteran of conflicts that officially never happened, a ghost whose confirmed kills included targets eliminated from distances that stretched the boundaries of believable. His Dragunov SVD had been modified with a custom barrel and precision optics that represented decades of Soviet ballistic research. He'd spent 90 minutes in preparation, factoring variables that most snipers never even considered. The microscopic variations in bullet weight, the subtle differences in powder charge that could affect muzzle velocity by mere feet per second, even the gravitational variations caused by the mineral density of the surrounding rock formations. When Petrov fired, his bullet achieved something no other had managed. It passed cleanly through the keyhole opening. For a moment, the observation room held its collective breath. Through high-powered spotting scopes, they watched the projectile arc downward toward the target with mathematical perfection. But at the last possible moment, some invisible force seemed to nudge the bullet slightly off course. It impacted the ravine floor 3 inches from the target, sending up a small puff of dust that felt like a mockery of Petrov's legendary reputation. The failure hit Petrov harder than the others. This was a man who had never missed a target that he deemed mathematically achievable. His calculations had been flawless, his execution textbook perfect. Yet something about this particular shot seemed to exist outside the normal rules of physics, as if the target occupied a space where conventional ballistics simply didn't apply.
By evening, word of the challenge had spread throughout the facility. Off-duty personnel began gathering in the observation room, drawn by the spectacle of watching the world's elite snipers humbled by a target the size of a silver dollar. Bets were being placed not on who would make the shot, but on whether it could be made at all. Some of the facility's ballistics experts had run computer simulations of the required trajectory, and their results only confirmed what experience was suggesting. The shot defied the fundamental principles of projectile motion. It was during this growing circus atmosphere that she first made her presence known. Most of the personnel in the facility knew her only by reputation, if they knew her at all. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen had been assigned to the joint training exercise as a liaison officer, responsible for coordinating logistics and communications between the various international units. Her official military occupational specialty was listed as intelligence analysis, and nothing in her public records suggested any particular expertise with firearms. What the records didn't show was that Chen had grown up on a ranch in Montana, where she'd learned to shoot almost before she could properly read. Her grandfather, a Korean War veteran, had taught her that marksmanship wasn't just about mathematics and muscle memory. It was about understanding the conversation between the shooter, the weapon, and the world around them. While her contemporaries had learned shooting as a skill, Chen had absorbed it as a language, a way of reading the subtle stories told by wind patterns, air pressure, and the barely perceptible ways that gravity pulled differently in different places. Her military career had taken her far from those Montana hills, through intelligence training and overseas deployments where her analytical skills proved more valuable than her marksmanship. But she had never stopped shooting, never stopped listening to that conversation between bullet and target that her grandfather had taught her to hear. During her off-duty hours, she could often be found at whatever shooting range was available, not to maintain qualification scores or compete for recognition, but simply to continue that lifelong dialogue with physics and precision. Chen had been watching the sniper challenge from the back of the observation room, saying nothing as 12 of the world's most elite marksmen failed where she believed she could succeed. It wasn't arrogance that kept her silent.
It wasn't arrogance that kept her silent. It was the understanding that sometimes the most important conversations happen not in words, but in the space between intention and action. In the moment when human intuition meets mathematical impossibility and finds a path that calculations alone could never discover. As the frustrated snipers began packing their equipment, preparing to admit defeat to a target that had proven unconquerable, Chen finally stepped forward and spoke the words that would change everything. "Mind if I give it a try?" The observation room fell silent, in a way that felt almost oppressive. 12 of the world's most elite snipers turned to look at the woman who had just volunteered to attempt what they had collectively deemed impossible. The silence stretched for several heartbeats, filled with the kind of tension that emerges when established hierarchies are suddenly challenged by an unknown variable. Master Sergeant Rodriguez was the first to find his voice, though it carried a tone of barely concealed skepticism. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we've just spent the better part of a day proving that shot can't be made. These aren't amateur marksmen who've been trying. We're talking about operators with combined decades of experience and confirmed kills in combat zones across 6 continents. Chen's response was delivered with the quiet confidence that comes from absolute certainty rather than bravado. "I understand that, Sergeant. I've been watching each attempt, and I believe I know why the shot is failing." She moved toward the window overlooking the target area, her gaze fixed on the distant ravine with the intensity of someone reading a complex mathematical equation. "The issue isn't the marksmanship or the equipment, it's the approach." Colonel Mitchell, intrigued despite his skepticism, gestured for Chen to continue. "What do you mean by approach, Sergeant Chen?" "Every shooter who's attempted this target has been fighting against the physics of the shot instead of working with them." She pulled out a small notebook filled with observations she'd been making throughout the day.
Look at the trajectory calculations everyone's been using. They're all based on the assumption that we need to force the bullet through that keyhole opening and then somehow make it drop vertically to reach the target. But that's not how bullets work. Projectiles want to follow natural paths, not fight against them. She moved to the spotting scope that had been set up to observe the target area, adjusting the focus with the familiarity of someone who had spent countless hours behind optics. The key isn't the keyhole opening at all. Everyone's been assuming that's the only path to the target, but if you study the rock formations carefully, there's another route. See that shadow line running along the eastern wall of the ravine? That's not just shadow, that's a natural deflection channel carved by decades of wind erosion. The snipers gathered around the scope, taking turns examining what Chen was describing. Slowly, grudgingly, they began to see what she was seeing. The shadow line she'd identified wasn't just a visual feature, it represented a subtle change in the rock face's angle, a natural curve that could potentially redirect a projectile's path if approached from the correct angle. Sergeant Major Thompson, the British SAS veteran, studied the formation through the scope for several minutes before speaking. Even if that deflection channel exists, the angle required to utilize it would be... He paused, running quick calculations in his head. You'd need to approach from at least 30 degrees off the direct line to target. That would put the shooting position somewhere up on the ridge line, nearly 1,000 meters from target instead of 800. 1,043 meters to be precise, Chen replied without hesitation, and the approach angle would be 37 degrees off direct, compensating for the deflection characteristics of that particular type of granite formation. She closed her notebook and looked directly at Colonel Mitchell. Sir, I've been studying that target since the first attempt was made this morning. I believe I can make it, but I'll need to move to a different firing position than the one everyone else has been using. The request created a new level of complexity. The original shooting position had been chosen for safety reasons as much as for line of sight. Moving to the ridgeline Chen was suggesting would require a significant repositioning of safety personnel and spotters. More importantly, it would mean admitting that 12 elite snipers had been attempting the shot from a fundamentally flawed position for the entire day. Major Harrison, the wage safety officer, voiced the concern that was on everyone's mind. Sergeant Chen, even if your deflection theory is correct, you're talking about a ricochet shot. Ricochet shots are inherently unpredictable. The variables involved in calculating how a bullet will behave after impacting a rock surface are beyond reliable computation. You might hit that deflection channel perfectly and still have the bullet end up hundreds of yards from your intended target. Chen nodded, acknowledging the validity of the concern. You're absolutely right about the unpredictability factor, sir. Under normal circumstances, I would never recommend attempting a ricochet shot. But these aren't normal circumstances. The mathematics of the direct approach have been proven impossible by 12 excellent marksmen. Sometimes when conventional approaches fail, you have to trust unconventional solutions. She gestured back toward the target area, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining a fundamental truth. My grandfather used to tell me that bullets have memory. They remember the barrel they came from, the hands that loaded them, the intention behind the shot. But they also remembered the landscape they travel through. That deflection channel isn't just a random geological feature. It's been shaped by decades of wind patterns, temperature variations, and natural erosion. It has its own personality, its own way of interacting with objects that pass through it. The concept she was describing bordered on the mystical, the kind of intuitive understanding that couldn't be quantified in ballistic tables or computer models. Yet something about the way she spoke suggested this wasn't New Age philosophy, but rather the articulation of insights gained through years of studying the subtle relationships between projectile, environment, and target. Colonel Mitchell found himself facing a decision that went beyond simple range management. Allowing Chen to attempt the shot would require significant resources and safety considerations, but more importantly, it would represent an acknowledgement that conventional military doctrine might not hold all the answers, that sometimes solutions emerge from unexpected sources and unconventional thinking.
After what felt like an eternity of deliberation, Colonel Mitchell made his decision. All right, Sergeant Chen, we'll give you your shot, but I want every safety protocol followed to the letter. Major Harrison, I need you to personally oversee the positioning of safety personnel along the entire projected trajectory path. If there's even the slightest possibility of a ricochet endangering anyone, we shut this down immediately. The decision sent a ripple of activity through the observation room. Range safety personnel began coordinating the complex logistics of repositioning spotters and establishing secure zones along the new trajectory path Chen had proposed. The 12 snipers who had failed at the shot found themselves in the unusual position of becoming spectators to an attempt by someone they had never seen fire a weapon in combat conditions. But it was Chen's next request that truly surprised everyone. "Sir, I'd like to use my own rifle instead of the standardized weapons everyone else has been using." She gestured toward a hard case that had been sitting unnoticed in the corner of the room throughout the day. "It's a custom build, and I'm more familiar with its characteristics than I could become with any other weapon system in the time available." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow at this request. "What kind of custom build are we talking about, Sergeant?" Chen opened the case with the careful reverence that shooters reserve for their most prized possessions. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, lay a rifle that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than on a modern battlefield. The weapon was clearly based on a Remington 700 Action, but every component had been modified or replaced with parts that spoke of decades of careful refinement. "It's built around my great-grandfather's Remington Action," Chen explained, running her hands along the rifle stock with obvious affection. "The Action dates to 1943, but it's been completely rebuilt with modern components. Custom barrel by Krieger, Macmillan stock, Timney trigger, loophole optics. The barrel has been hand-lapped and fire-formed specifically for the ammunition I load myself." The rifle stock showed the kind of wear patterns that come only from years of regular use, and the metal components had the subtle patina that develops when precision instruments are maintained by someone who understands them intimately. This wasn't a showpiece or a trophy weapon. It was a tool that had been refined through countless hours of practice and real-world application. Sergeant Major Thompson examined the rifle with the appreciation of someone who understood craftsmanship. "What's the barrel length and twist rate?" 26-inch barrel with a 1 to 10 twist, optimized for 175 grain Sierra Match King bullets, loaded over 44.5 grains of Vargate powder. Muzzle velocity runs about 2,650 feet per second, with an extreme spread under 10 FPS. Chen's recitation of specifications carried the automatic precision of someone who had memorized every detail of their weapon system. The rifle has been zeroed at 100 yards and verified at distances out to 1,200 yards in various weather conditions. What impressed the assembled snipers wasn't just the technical specifications, it was the obvious intimacy between shooter and weapon. Modern military snipers were trained to be adaptable, capable of achieving precision with any rifle system they might encounter in the field. But Chen represented something different, the vanishing breed of marksmen who developed an almost supernatural understanding of a single weapon system through years of dedicated practice. Major Harrison completed his safety briefing and radio check with all position personnel. "All stations report ready, Colonel. We have spotters positioned at 500-meter intervals along both the direct trajectory path and the proposed deflection route. Medical personnel are standing by, and we have authorization to shut down all air traffic within a 5-mile radius during the attempt." The logistics of the safety protocols had taken nearly 2 hours to implement, and the desert sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. The changing light conditions would add another variable to an already complex shot, but Chen seemed unconcerned by the additional challenge. If anything, she appeared more focused as the golden hour approached, as if the changing light was revealing details about the target area that had been invisible during the harsh clarity of midday sun. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Chen began her preparation ritual with the methodical precision of someone who had performed the same routine thousands of times before. She laid out her equipment in a specific pattern on a shooting mat that showed obvious signs of extensive field use. Every item had its designated place. Ammunition sorted by lot number, range-finding equipment, weather monitoring devices, and a small leather journal filled with ballistic data accumulated over years of shooting in various conditions. Her ammunition preparation was particularly meticulous. Each cartridge had been hand-loaded to specifications that went far beyond military standards. The bullets had been sorted by weight to within 0.1 grains. The powder charges measured to tolerances that approached laboratory precision.
Even the cases had been carefully prepared, with neck tensions adjusted to provide optimal bullet release characteristics. "How many rounds do you plan to fire?" Colonel Mitchell asked, watching Chen's methodical preparation process. "Just one," Chen replied, without looking up from her equipment arrangement. "Either the theory is correct and the shot is possible, or it isn't. Multiple attempts won't change the fundamental physics involved." The confidence in her response was striking, particularly in contrast to the extended attempts made by the previous 12 shooters. Whereas they had approached the target as a problem to be solved through persistence and minor adjustments, Chen seemed to view it as a puzzle with a single, definitive solution. As she began the trek up to the ridgeline shooting position she had identified, several of the other snipers decided to follow at a respectful distance. They were driven partly by curiosity and partly by the desire to witness firsthand whatever technique Chen planned to employ. The hike to the new position would take approximately 20 minutes over rocky terrain that required careful navigation to avoid disturbing loose stones that could affect the shooting environment. The ridgeline position offered a dramatically different perspective on the target area. From this angle, the deflection channel Chen had identified through the spotting scope became much more apparent. A subtle groove in the rock face that seemed to lead directly from the elevated shooting position down toward the target location. But the increased distance and the steep downward angle created a shooting scenario that none of the assembled observers had ever encountered in their military careers.
The ridgeline position provided a view of the target area that was both breathtaking and intimidating. The Nevada desert stretched out below in all directions, painted in the golden hues of late afternoon sunlight that transformed the harsh landscape into something approaching artistic beauty. But for Chen, the aesthetic appeal was secondary to the tactical information that changing light was revealing about the shot ahead. From this elevated position, the deflection channel she had identified appeared as a subtle but unmistakable groove in the eastern wall of the ravine, carved by decades of wind and water erosion into a natural pathway that seemed to lead directly from her position to the target below. The geometry was complex, but not impossible. If her calculations were correct, a bullet fired at precisely the right angle and velocity could use the channel's curved surface to redirect its trajectory downward toward the target. The assembled observers maintained a respectful distance while Chen conducted her final preparations. Through their spotting scopes and binoculars, they watched her move through a routine that was unlike anything they had witnessed from the previous shooters. Where the others had relied heavily on technological aids, laser rangefinders, ballistic computers, and wind meters, Chen's approach seemed almost primitive by comparison, based more on direct observation and intuitive assessment than on digital calculations. She spent nearly 15 minutes simply lying in her chosen firing position, not looking through her rifle scope, but rather studying the target area with naked eyes. Occasionally, she would hold up a blade of grass or a small piece of vegetation, testing the subtle air currents that were invisible to electronic instruments, but could be felt by someone who knew how to read the language of moving air. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, observing through high-powered optics, noted Chen's unconventional preparation methods. "She's not using a rangefinder," he commented to Thompson. "How is she calculating the exact distance without laser measurement?" Thompson had been wondering the same thing. Military snipers were trained to rely on precise measurements, to remove guesswork from the equation through technological precision. But Chen's approach suggested someone who had learned to shoot in an era when such technology wasn't available, when marksmanship required developing an almost supernatural sense of distance, wind, and trajectory through pure experience. The answer became apparent when Chen pulled out a small, worn device from her equipment bag, a vintage optical rangefinder that looked like it had been manufactured sometime in the 1970s. The instrument required manual adjustment and interpretation, demanding skills that modern snipers rarely developed. Yet, Chen operated it with the fluid efficiency of someone who had used similar equipment for decades. 1,046.3 meters, she called out to the spotters, her voice carrying clearly across the desert air. The distance was remarkably close to her earlier estimate of 1,043 meters, made entirely through visual assessment from the observation room nearly a kilometer away.
Her weather assessment was equally unconventional. While the previous shooters had used electronic wind meters and barometric pressure gauges, Chen relied on methods that seemed to belong to an earlier century. She scattered small amounts of powder into the air at different elevations, watching how the particles moved to identify wind patterns that instruments might miss. She studied the way distant heat shimmer affected visibility, using the distortions to gauge air density and temperature gradients that could affect bullet trajectory. Wind is variable between 3 and 7 miles per hour from the southwest, with thermal columns rising from the ravine floor creating updrafts along the eastern wall, she reported to the safety spotters positioned along the trajectory path. Temperature differential between this position and the target area is approximately 8 degrees, suggesting air density variations that will affect bullet drop by roughly 2 inches at this distance. The level of detail in her environmental assessment impressed even the veteran snipers who had been skeptical of her unconventional approach. These were variables that most shooters would either ignore or attempt to compensate for through software calculations. Chen was reading them directly from the landscape itself, translating the subtle signs of a living environment into mathematical corrections that could mean the difference between success and failure. As she finally settled behind her rifle, the observers noted another unusual aspect of her technique. Most military snipers were trained to establish a comfortable shooting position and then adjust their scope to align with the target. Chen did the opposite. She adjusted her body position to work with her scoop's natural point of aim, moving herself rather than her equipment to achieve the precise alignment the shot required. Her breathing pattern was different, too. Instead of the controlled respiratory cycle taught in military sniper schools, inhale, exhale halfway, hold, fire, Chen seemed to be timing her breathing to match some external rhythm, perhaps the subtle wind patterns she had been monitoring, or the thermal cycles that affected air density in the ravine below. The rifle she had brought was clearly a precision instrument, but it looked almost archaic compared to the high-tech weapon systems the other shooters had employed. There were no electronic aids visible on the weapon, no digital displays or computer-assisted targeting systems. Just steel and wood and glass, combined with decades of careful refinement to create a tool that was perfectly matched to its user's capabilities. As Chen made her final scope adjustments, the desert around them seemed to hold its breath. The wind had died to almost nothing, creating the kind of still conditions that snipers dream about. The target, barely visible through high-powered optics at over 1,000 meters distance, gleamed in the late afternoon sun like a challenge issued by fate itself. "Range is clear," reported Major Harrison from his position with the safety team. "All personnel are in position and accounted for. Shooter, you are cleared to fire when ready." Chen acknowledged the clearance with a slight nod, never taking her eye from the rifle scope. Through the crosshairs, she could see not just the target, but the entire complex geometry of the shot, the deflection channel, the trajectory path, the point where mathematics and intuition would either converge in success or diverge in failure.
The moment stretched like a held breath across the Nevada desert. Through her rifle scope, Chen could see the target with crystal clarity, a small metallic disc that had become the focus of an entire day's worth of expert frustration. But she wasn't looking at it the way the previous shooters had, where they had seen an endpoint, a destination for their bullets to reach. Chen saw the target as part of a larger conversation between physics and possibility. Her crosshairs weren't aligned with the target itself. Instead, they were positioned on a point along the deflection channel she had identified, a spot where the natural curve of the rock formation would, if her calculations were correct, redirect her bullet's trajectory toward its intended destination. It was a shot that required her to aim at one place in order to hit another, trusting in the mathematical relationship between angle, velocity, and the deflection characteristics of weathered granite. The assembled observers watched through their spotting scopes in fascination and disbelief. Through their optics, they could see Chen's point of aim, and it appeared to be directed at solid rock rather than at the target itself. To shooters trained in the direct application of firepower, her approach looked like a deliberate miss rather than a precision shot attempt.
Her scope is pointed at least 3 feet to the right of the target, Rodriguez whispered to Thompson, both men studying Chen's rifle position through their own optics. Either she's miscalculated completely, or she's attempting something that goes against every principle of marksmanship we've ever learned. Thompson nodded grimly. If she's right about the deflection characteristics of that rock formation, it's the most brilliant piece of field ballistics I've ever witnessed. If she's wrong... He didn't finish the sentence. They both understood that a missed ricochet shot could send a high-velocity projectile in almost any direction, potentially endangering personnel despite all the safety precautions that had been put in place. Chen's final preparation seemed to take forever, though in reality it lasted only a few seconds. She made microscopic adjustments to her scope setting, compensating for variables that existed only in her calculations. Her breathing settled into the deep, controlled rhythm that experienced shooters recognize as the precursor to the perfect shot. Through her scope, the world contracted to a single point of focus, where intention met physics in the space between heartbeats. The trigger break came as a surprise even to Chen herself, the result of unconscious muscle memory responding to the moment when all variables aligned in perfect harmony. The rifle's report echoed across the desert landscape like thunder, followed immediately by the distinctive whine of a bullet traveling at over 2,600 feet per second through the thin desert air. For the first few hundred meters, the bullet's trajectory appeared conventional, arcing downward toward the ravine in a path that seemed to validate traditional ballistic calculations. But as it approached the deflection channel Chen had identified, something extraordinary happened. The projectile struck the curved rock surface at precisely the angle Chen had calculated, and instead of fragmenting or tumbling, as most bullets would when striking solid stone, it maintained its structural integrity while its trajectory changed dramatically. The physics of the deflection were visible to the observers through their high-powered optics, though what they were witnessing seemed to violate fundamental laws of projectile behavior. The bullet's path curved downward at an angle that should have been impossible, following the natural groove in the rock formation like a marble rolling along a predetermined track. The change in trajectory was so pronounced that it appeared the bullet had developed the ability to steer itself toward its target. "I don't believe what I'm seeing," breathed Sergeant Major Thompson, his voice barely audible through the radio system connecting all observation positions. Through his spotting scope, he could track the bullet's path as it followed the deflection channel downward, its trajectory bending in ways that seemed to mock conventional understanding of ballistics. The bullet's final approach to the target lasted perhaps 2 seconds in real time, but to the observers it felt like an eternity of suspended possibility. After 12 failed attempts by some of the world's most elite marksmen, after hours of mathematical calculation and technological precision had proven inadequate, the success or failure of Chen's unconventional approach would determine whether the shot was genuinely impossible or simply required a different kind of thinking. The impact came with a sharp metallic ring that carried clearly across the desert air, followed immediately by the sight of the target disc spinning wildly from the bullet's kinetic energy. Through their spotting scopes, the observers could see the unmistakable evidence of a center hit, the kind of precise impact that leaves no doubt about the shooter's accuracy. The silence that followed lasted for several heartbeats, as if the desert itself needed time to process what had just occurred. Then the radio system exploded with confirmations from spotters positioned along the trajectory path, all reporting the same impossible result. The target had been hit dead center by a shot that had violated every principle of conventional marksmanship. "Confirmed hit," reported Major Harrison, his voice carrying a mixture of professional confirmation and personal amazement. "Direct center impact on target. I repeat, we have a confirmed center hit on target from Shooter 1. Chen remained motionless behind her rifle for several more seconds, as if she needed time to process the success of her own shot. When she finally lifted her head from the scope, her expression showed not triumph or satisfaction, but rather the quiet acknowledgement of someone who had trusted in calculations that others couldn't understand and had been proven correct by the ultimate arbiter of ballistic accuracy. The 12 snipers who had failed at the same shot began making their way up to Chen's position, driven by the need to understand how she had accomplished what they could not. Their approach was a mixture of professional respect, personal curiosity, and the kind of competitive analysis that drives elite operators to constantly seek improvement in their craft. As Chen began the process of securing her rifle and collecting her equipment, She seemed almost surprised by the attention her successful shot had generated. For her, the shot had been the logical conclusion of careful observation and calculation, the inevitable result of reading the landscape correctly rather than fighting against its natural characteristics. But for the 12 elite snipers making their way up the ridge to her position, what they had witnessed represented something far more significant than a successful shot. It was a fundamental challenge to everything they thought they understood about the limits of precision marksmanship. The silence that had followed the confirmed hit was finally broken by the sound of boots on rocky terrain as the assembled snipers and observers made their way up to Chen's position. Each step seemed to carry the weight of professional curiosity mixed with genuine bewilderment. These were men who had built their careers on understanding the precise mechanics of long-distance shooting, yet they had just witnessed something that defied their collective expertise and challenged the fundamental principles they had spent decades mastering. The target, now bearing the unmistakable mark of Chen's bullet impact, continued to gleam in the late afternoon sun like a silent testament to the possibility that the impossible was merely a matter of perspective. The deflection channel that had seemed like a theoretical curiosity from the observation room now appeared as an obvious pathway when viewed from Chen's elevated position. Yet somehow, 12 of the world's most elite marksmen had failed to recognize its potential. As Chen methodically packed her equipment with the same careful precision she had demonstrated throughout her preparation, the approaching observers could see that her post-shot routine was as unconventional as her shooting technique had been. Where most snipers would immediately begin analyzing their shot, discussing variables and confirming impact details, Chen simply continued her equipment maintenance as if she had just completed a routine training exercise rather than achieving something that would be discussed in military circles for years to come.
Master Sergeant Rodriguez was the first to reach Chen's position, his expression a mixture of professional respect and genuine bewilderment. The climb up the ridge had given him time to process what he had witnessed, but if anything, proximity to the shooting position only deepened the mystery. From this elevated vantage point, the deflection channel Chen had utilized was clearly visible. Yet somehow, he and 11 other elite marksmen had failed to recognize its potential during their earlier reconnaissance of the target area. "Sergeant Chen," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone trying to understand a fundamental shift in his professional worldview. "I've been shooting professionally for over 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished. That deflection shot. How did you even know it was possible?" Chen's response carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone explaining a basic principle to a student, though her words would challenge everything the assembled snipers thought they understood about marksmanship. "The rock formation told me it was possible. Granite weathers in predictable patterns, and that particular type of erosion creates surfaces with consistent deflection characteristics. The challenge wasn't whether the ricochet would work, it was calculating the precise angle and velocity needed to make it work predictably." Her explanation only deepened the mystery for the assembled snipers. What she described as straightforward observation and calculation represented a level of environmental awareness that went beyond conventional sniper training. Military marksmen were taught to work with environmental conditions, wind, temperature, humidity, but Chen was describing an approach that treated the landscape itself as an active participant in the shooting equation. Sergeant Major Thompson, still studying the target area through his spotting scope, provided confirmation of the shot's precision that sent murmurs through the gathering crowd of observers. "The impact is dead center, maybe 2 millimeters off perfect. At over 1,000 meters distance through a deflection shot? That's accuracy that shouldn't be possible with conventional ballistics." The statement hung in the air like a challenge to the fundamental laws of physics. Precision shooting was built on mathematical certainty, on the ability to calculate trajectories with scientific accuracy. Yet Chen had achieved a level of precision through methods that seemed to exist outside the boundaries of conventional science, relying on intuitive understanding rather than technological measurement.
Senior Lieutenant Petrov, the Russian sniper whose own attempt had come closest to success among the previous 12 shooters, studied Chen's rifle with the careful attention of someone trying to understand how conventional equipment had achieved unconventional results. "Your weapon system appears to be custom modifications of standard components," he observed, "but the modifications themselves don't explain the capability we just witnessed. There must be something in your shooting methodology that goes beyond equipment optimization." Chen nodded, acknowledging the validity of his observation while beginning to articulate concepts that would challenge fundamental assumptions about marksmanship training. The rifle and ammunition are important, but they're just tools. The real key is learning to read the conversation between the projectile, the environment, and the target. Most shooters try to impose their will on these variables, to control them through technology and calculation, but sometimes it's more effective to listen to what the environment is telling you and work with those natural patterns rather than against them. Her words carried implications that extended beyond far shooting technique into broader questions about the relationship between human capability and technological enhancement. In an era where military success was increasingly measured by technological sophistication, Chen represented something different, an approach that emphasized human adaptability and environmental awareness over computational precision and equipment superiority. Colonel Mitchell, who had been monitoring the situation from the observation room, finally arrived at the ridgeline position accompanied by Major Harrison and a small team of range safety personnel. His first concern was procedural, ensuring that all safety protocols had been followed and that the unconventional shot hadn't created any hazardous situations. But his second concern was far more complex: understanding how a liaison officer with no official sniper training had accomplished what 12 elite operators could not. "Sergeant Chen," Colonel Mitchell began, his tone carrying the formal authority of a commanding officer seeking explanations for extraordinary events, "I need you to walk me through exactly what you observed about that target that the previous shooters missed. Your approach was so different from standard doctrine that I'm having difficulty understanding how you identified the deflection opportunity in the first place." Chen's explanation would reveal a depth of environmental awareness that impressed even the veteran officers present, demonstrating knowledge systems that existed outside conventional military training frameworks. She described how the morning light had revealed subtle shadow patterns that indicated variations in the rock face structure. She explained how the afternoon temperature changes created air density differentials that affected the way light refracted through the ravine, providing visual cues about wind patterns and thermal columns that electronic instruments couldn't detect. Most importantly, Chen continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining fundamental principles that others had somehow missed, everyone was approaching the target as if it existed in isolation, as if the shot was simply a matter of drawing a straight line between rifle and target. But nothing in nature exists in isolation. That target was part of a larger system: the ravine, the rock formations, the air currents, the way light and shadow interact with the terrain. Once you start seeing it as a system rather than an individual challenge, different solutions become apparent. Her explanation resonated with the assembled snipers on a level that transcended technical understanding. What she described as a holistic approach to marksmanship that incorporated variables most shooters never considered, treating the environment not as an obstacle to overcome, but a partner in achieving precision. It was a philosophy that belonged more to ancient hunting traditions than to modern military doctrine, yet it had proven more effective than all their technological sophistication. The implications of Chen's success extended far beyond the immediate challenge of hitting a difficult target. If her methods could be understood and replicated, they might represent a fundamental advancement in precision shooting techniques. But the knowledge she had demonstrated seemed to be as much art as science, requiring the kind of intuitive understanding that couldn't easily be transferred for conventional training programs. Major Harrison, responsible for range safety and documentation of the exercise, found himself facing an unusual challenge in writing his official report. Military documentation required precise technical descriptions, measurable variables, and reproducible procedures. But Chen's shot seemed to exist outside the boundaries of conventional military analysis, achieved through methods that were more philosophical than technical. Sergeant Chen, Harrison asked, if you were tasked with training other snipers to make similar shots, how would you approach that instruction? What you've accomplished here suggests capabilities that go beyond standard marksmanship training. The question touched on something that had been bothering Chen throughout the day's events. Her grandfather's teachings, the foundation of her shooting philosophy, had been passed down through generations of hunters and soldiers who had learned to read landscapes with the intimacy of people whose survival depended on understanding their environment. It wasn't knowledge that could be easily codified into training manuals or reduced to mathematical formulas. The problem with military sniper training, Chen replied carefully, is that it focuses on eliminating variables rather than learning to work with them. Everything is about creating controlled conditions, using technology to remove uncertainty from the equation. But real-world shooting situations are never fully controllable. Sometimes you have to learn to have a conversation with uncertainty itself. Her words carried implications that extended beyond marksmanship training. In an age of increasingly sophisticated military technology, Chen represented something different, an approach that emphasized human adaptability over technological dominance, intuitive understanding over computational precision. It was a reminder that some forms of expertise couldn't be replicated by machines or reduced to algorithmic processes. The 12 snipers who had failed at the same shot found themselves in the unusual position of being students rather than experts, learning from someone whose approach challenged fundamental assumptions about their profession. For operators accustomed to being the best at what they did, the experience was both humbling and enlightening, forcing them to confront the possibility that their expertise might be more limited than they had believed. As the desert sun continued its descent toward the western horizon, the assembled personnel began the process of securing equipment and preparing to return to the main facility. But the impact of what they had witnessed would extend far beyond the immediate events of the day, raising questions about training methods, tactical approaches, and the relationship between human intuition and technological capability in modern military operations.
The return journey to the main facility was conducted in an atmosphere of subdued contemplation that was unusual for a group of elite military operators. Typically, successful training exercises were followed by detailed tactical analysis, competitive banter, and the kind of professional discussion that helped solidify lessons learned. But Chen's impossible shot had created a situation that didn't fit into normal categories of military experience, leaving the assembled snipers struggling to process what they had witnessed. During the equipment breakdown and site cleanup, several interesting details about Chen's approach had become apparent. Her ammunition, upon closer examination, proved to be hand-loaded to specifications that went far beyond military standards. Each cartridge had been crafted with laboratory-level precision, but the loading data she used didn't match any standard ballistic tables. Instead, her powder charges and bullet seating depths had been determined through years of experimentation with that specific rifle, creating ammunition that was perfectly matched to her weapon's unique characteristics. These loads are unlike anything I've seen in 20 years of precision shooting, observed Senior Lieutenant Petrov, examining one of Chen's unused cartridges with the careful attention of someone who understood the science of ballistics. The powder charge is lower than standard military specifications, but the bullet seating depth has been adjusted to create optimal pressure curves for maximum accuracy rather than maximum velocity. This ammunition was designed for precision rather than penetration.
The revelation added another layer to the mystery of Chen's capabilities. Military snipers typically worked with standardized ammunition that balanced accuracy with logistical considerations, rounds that could be mass-produced and reliably perform across a wide range of weapons and conditions. But Chen's approach suggested someone who had devoted years to perfecting every aspect of her shooting system, creating a level of weapon-ammunition integration that was more commonly seen in competitive shooting than in military applications. Her rifle, upon closer inspection, revealed similar levels of customization. What had appeared to be a relatively simple weapon system actually incorporated dozens of subtle modifications that had been refined over years of use. The trigger had been adjusted to a pull weight that was precisely suited to Chen's sand size and grip characteristics. The stock had been modified to fit her body geometry perfectly. Even the scope mounting system had been customized to provide optimal eye relief and sight picture for her shooting position. "This isn't just a rifle," noted Master Sergeant Rodriguez, studying the weapon with obvious appreciation. "This is an extension of the shooter herself. Everything about the system has been tailored to work perfectly with one specific person. It's the kind of integration you see in Olympic-level competitive shooting, not in military applications." The observation highlighted a fundamental difference between Chen's approach and military doctrine. Standard military training emphasized adaptability, the ability to achieve precision with whatever equipment was available under whatever conditions existed. But Chen represented something different: the pursuit of absolute precision through perfect integration between shooter, weapon, and environment. It was an approach that sacrificed adaptability for the sake of achieving capabilities that standard methods couldn't match. As the group prepared to depart the ridgeline position, Colonel Mitchell made a decision that surprised everyone present. Instead of returning directly to the facility, he requested that Chen provide a detailed explanation of her shot selection and execution process, documented for potential integration into future training programs. What followed was an impromptu classroom session conducted on a desert ridgeline with some of the world's most elite snipers serving as students to someone whose official military occupation had nothing to do with precision shooting. Chen's explanation of her shot process revealed thinking that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. While calculating the mathematical requirements of the ricochet trajectory, she had also been reading environmental conditions that most shooters would never notice. Her decision-making process incorporated variables ranging from geological formations to atmospheric physics, from historical weather patterns to the acoustic properties of desert air. "The deflection channel I used wasn't just a lucky geological formation," Chen explained, sketching diagrams in the desert sand to illustrate her points. "That type of erosion pattern occurs in specific geological conditions, created by centuries of wind and water interaction with granite formations that have particular mineral compositions. Once you understand how those patterns form, you can predict where they'll occur and how they'll affect projectile behavior." Her explanation revealed knowledge that seemed to belong more to geology or atmospheric physics than to marksmanship training. Yet she had integrated this diverse information into a shooting system that achieved results beyond anything conventional training could produce. It was a demonstration of how expertise in one field could be transformed through creative application into revolutionary capabilities in another. The impromptu lesson continued for over an hour, covering topics that ranged from ballistic physics to environmental psychology. Chen's teaching style was unlike anything the assembled snipers had experienced in their military careers. She treated shooting not as a technical skill, but as a form of environmental literacy, a way of reading and responding to the complex systems that existed in any shooting environment. Most shooting instruction focuses on controlling variables, but real precision comes from learning to dance with them. Every environment has its own personality, its own way of interacting with bullets and shooters. The key is learning to recognize those personalities and work with them rather than against them. Her philosophy represented a fundamental departure from military doctrine, which emphasized standardization and reproducibility over adaptability and intuition. Yet her results spoke for themselves. She had accomplished what 12 elite operators could not, using methods that seemed to exist outside the boundaries of conventional training. As the desert evenings settled around them, the assembled personnel began to understand that they had witnessed something far more significant than an exceptional shot. They had seen a demonstration of capabilities that suggested new possibilities for human-environment interaction, new ways of thinking about the relationship between technology and intuition in high-stakes situations. The implications extended beyond marksmanship into broader questions about military training, tactical doctrine, and the role of individual expertise in an age of increasingly sophisticated technological systems. Chen's success suggested that some forms of human capability couldn't be replicated or replaced by machines, that intuitive understanding might remain superior to computational precision in certain critical applications.
The informal debriefing session on the ridgeline had revealed more questions than answers about Chen's extraordinary capabilities, but it was during the vehicle convoy back to the main facility that the most significant revelations began to emerge. Colonel Mitchell, riding in the lead vehicle with Chen and Major Harrison, finally asked the question that had been bothering him since the successful shot. "Sergeant Chen, your official military record shows you as an intelligence analyst with no specialized marksmanship training. How did you develop the capabilities we witnessed today?" Chen's response opened a window into a background that was far more complex than her official personnel files suggested. "Sir, my grandfather was Zhang Wei Chen, a Chinese-American sniper who served with the Office of Strategic Services during World War II. After the war, he settled in Montana and spent the rest of his life teaching shooting to anyone who wanted to learn. My education started when I was 6 years old, and it continued until his death when I was 22. The mention of OSS service immediately caught Mitchell's attention. The Office of Strategic Services, predecessor to the CIA, had recruited individuals with extraordinary capabilities for operations that required skills beyond conventional military training. OSS operatives were selected not just for their technical abilities, but for their capacity to adapt, improvise, and succeed in situations where standard doctrine provided no guidance. My grandfather's approach to shooting was influenced by his wartime experiences in occupied China. He had to operate in environments where standard equipment wasn't available, where every shot had to count because ammunition was scarce, and where the ability to read terrain and weather patterns could mean the difference between mission success and death. He developed techniques that incorporated traditional Chinese hunting methods with modern ballistic science. The explanation began to illuminate the philosophical differences between Chen's approach to conventional military sniper training. While modern military doctrine emphasized technological superiority and standardized procedures, her grandfather's wartime experience had taught him to work with limited resources and unpredictable conditions. The knowledge he had passed down represented a fusion of ancient wisdom and modern science, adapted to create capabilities that existed outside normal military categories. After I joined the military, I maintained my shooting skills as a personal interest rather than a professional specialization. My intelligence analysis work has taken me to locations around the world, and I've used those opportunities to study different shooting environments to understand how various geographical and climatic conditions affect ballistic performance. What you saw today was the result of applying 20 years of accumulated environmental data to a single-shot opportunity. Major Harrison, who had been responsible for documenting the day's events, found himself revising his understanding of what had occurred. What he had initially categorized as an exceptional individual performance now appeared to be the result of systematic knowledge accumulation spanning multiple decades and drawing from sources that weren't part of any military curriculum.
The deflection shot technique isn't something I invented. It's based on principles my grandfather learned from Chinese hunters who had been using ricochet shots for centuries to take game in mountainous terrain. The mathematics are complex, but the underlying concept is simple. Instead of fighting against the environment, you learn to use it as a tool for achieving your objectives. Her explanation revealed that what appeared to be intuitive genius was actually the application of systematic knowledge that had been accumulated across generations. The impossible shot was possible because Chen possessed information about ballistic environment interactions that wasn't available through conventional military training. Her success represented not superhuman ability, but rather access to knowledge systems that existed outside mainstream military doctrine. The convoy arrived at the main facility as the desert sun disappeared behind the western mountains, painting the sky in the deep purples and oranges that made Nevada sunsets legendary among military personnel stationed in the region. But instead of the usual end-of-day routine, the events at the ridgeline had created a situation that demanded immediate attention from higher command levels. Word of Chen's impossible shot had already reached the facility commander, Brigadier General Patricia Wells, who had requested an immediate briefing on the day's events. The implications of what had occurred extended beyond simple training exercise documentation. If Chen's techniques could be understood and replicated, they might represent a significant advancement in military capabilities that warranted formal investigation and potential integration into specialized training programs. The briefing session was conducted in the facility's main conference room with representatives from various military specializations in attendance. The gathering included not just sniper instructors and marksmanship specialists, but also ballistics experts, training doctrine specialists, and personnel psychology researchers who were interested in understanding how exceptional individual capabilities might be identified and developed within military organizations. Chen's presentation to the assembled officials was markedly different from her informal instruction on the ridgeline. Here, she was required to provide detailed technical explanations that could be documented and analyzed for potential military applications. The challenge was translating knowledge that was fundamentally intuitive and experiential into language that could be understood and evaluated by military bureaucracy. The key insight, Chen explained to the assembled officers, is that conventional ballistic calculations assume projectiles operate in simplified environments, uniform air density, consistent wind patterns, predictable terrain characteristics. But real-world shooting environments are complex systems where multiple variables interact in ways that linear calculations can't predict. Success requires learning to read those systems holistically rather than trying to control individual variables. Her explanation highlighted a fundamental tension within military doctrine between standardization and adaptability. Military organizations were built on the principle that effective procedures could be systematized and taught reliably to large numbers of personnel. But Chen's capabilities suggested that some forms of expertise might be inherently individual, requiring the kind of long-term knowledge accumulation that couldn't be replicated through standard training programs. The briefing continued late into the evening, covering topics that ranged from tactical applications to training methodology to the broader implications of incorporating non-standard knowledge systems into military doctrine. By the time the session concluded, it had become clear that Chen's impossible shot represented far more than an exceptional individual performance. It was a window into alternative approaches to military expertise that challenged fundamental assumptions about how capabilities were developed and applied.
The days following Chen's impossible shot saw a flurry of activity at the Nevada facility that extended far beyond normal post-exercise analysis.
Representatives from various military research institutions arrived to study Chen's techniques. Ballistics experts ran computer simulations, attempting to replicate her deflection calculations, and training doctrine specialists debated whether her methods could be integrated into existing sniper programs. What had begun as a casual shooting challenge had evolved into a comprehensive examination of the relationship between individual expertise and institutional knowledge in modern military operations. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a ballistics physicist from the Army Research Laboratory, spent 3 days conducting detailed analysis of Chen's shot, using high-speed cameras and computer modeling to understand exactly what had occurred during the projectile's interaction with the deflection channel. Her findings challenged several fundamental assumptions about ricochet behavior and projectile stability that had been accepted as scientific fact for decades. The bullet maintained structural integrity and directional control through the deflection in ways that our current models suggest should be impossible, Dr. Martinez explained during a technical briefing. The angle of impact, the surface characteristics of the granite formation, and the projectile's velocity all combined to create what we're calling a controlled ricochet, a deflection that behaves more like a guided trajectory change than a random bounce. Her analysis revealed that Chen's success hadn't been based on luck or exceptional intuition alone, but rather on empirical understanding of physical phenomena that academic ballistics research hadn't yet fully explored. The implications were significant not just for marksmanship training, but for the broader field of projectile physics and its applications in various military systems. Meanwhile, Colonel Mitchell found himself fielding inquiries from senior officers throughout the Department of Defense who had heard rumors about the Nevada incident. The story of a liaison officer outperforming 12 elite snipers had captured imaginations at the highest levels of military command, raising questions about talent identification, training methodologies, and the potential for discovering exceptional capabilities in unexpected places. The problem we're facing, Mitchell explained to General Wells during a private briefing, is that Sergeant Chen's capabilities appear to be the result of knowledge systems that exist outside our normal training doctrine. Her grandfather's OSS background gave her access to techniques and information that aren't part of any contemporary military curriculum. The question is whether those techniques can be systematized and taught, or whether they're inherently individual and experiential. The question touched on broader issues within modern military organizations, which had become increasingly dependent on technological solutions and standardized procedures. Chen's success suggested that some forms of human expertise might be irreplaceable by machines or institutional systems, requiring the kind of long-term knowledge accumulation that couldn't be mass-produced or rapidly transferred between individuals. Training specialists from the Army's sniper school at Fort Benning arrived to evaluate Chen's methods for potential integration into their curriculum. However, their initial assessments revealed the complexity of trying to institutionalize knowledge that was fundamentally based on individual relationship with environmental systems. Chen's techniques required years of observation and practice to develop the environmental awareness that made precise deflection shots possible. What Sergeant Chen accomplished represents mastery-level expertise in environmental ballistics, observed Master Sergeant James Kowalski, chief instructor at the Army Sniper School. The challenge is that mastery-level expertise typically requires individual mentorship over extended periods, which doesn't fit well with military training timelines or resource allocation. We can teach the basic principles, but developing the intuitive understanding she demonstrated would require a complete restructuring of how we approach sniper training. The implications extended beyond sniper training into broader questions about military education and development. Chen's success suggested that exceptional capabilities might be more commonly available than military organizations typically recognize, but only if personnel were given opportunities to develop expertise outside conventional institutional frameworks. Her intelligence analysis role had provided her with travel opportunities and diverse environmental exposure that had been crucial to developing her shooting capabilities. But those development opportunities had been incidental to her official duties rather than systematically planned. Psychological researchers studying Chen's case were particularly interested in her decision-making process during high-pressure situations. The pressure of performing after 12 elite snipers had failed should have been psychologically overwhelming, yet she executed her shot with the calm precision of someone conducting a routine training exercise. Her psychological profile suggested capabilities that went beyond technical skill into areas of stress management and performance optimization that were relevant to various military specializations. What's most remarkable about Sergeant Chen's performance, noted Dr. Robert Kim, a military psychologist studying the incident, is that she treated an impossible shot as a routine problem-solving exercise. Her psychological approach to extreme performance challenges suggests mental frameworks that could be applicable to various high-stress military situations beyond marksmanship. The research attention was beginning to make Chen uncomfortable. She had volunteered to attempt the shot as a simple matter of professional curiosity, not expecting that her success would generate institutional interest in analyzing and potentially replicating her capabilities. The transition from anonymous intelligence analyst to subject of military research had created personal and professional complications that she hadn't anticipated. "I understand the institutional interest in what occurred," Chen explained during a meeting with Colonel Mitchell, "but I'm concerned that the focus on analyzing my techniques might miss the broader point. The shot was possible because I had access to knowledge systems that aren't normally part of military training. Instead of trying to reverse engineer my specific methods, it might be more productive to examine how military organizations could better identify and develop the diverse expertise that personnel might possess outside their official specializations." Her observation highlighted a fundamental issue within large military organizations, the tendency to focus on standardized capabilities while overlooking the individual expertise that personnel might develop through personal interest, family background, or diverse life experiences. Chen's impossible shot had been made possible not by exceptional natural talent, but by systematic knowledge accumulation that had occurred parallel to, rather than as part of, her official military development. The Nevada incident was becoming a case study in the relationship between individual expertise and institutional capability, raising questions that extended far beyond marksmanship into the broader challenge of optimizing human potential within large organizational structures.
6 months after the impossible shot that had stunned 12 elite snipers, the ripple effects of Chen's achievement were still being felt throughout various branches of military training and research. What had begun as a casual shooting challenge had evolved into a comprehensive examination of how exceptional individual capabilities could be identified, developed, and potentially integrated into institutional training programs. But the lessons being learned extended far beyond marksmanship into fundamental questions about human potential and organizational effectiveness. The Army Sniper School at Fort Benning had implemented an experimental training module based on Chen's environmental awareness techniques, though with limited success. While students could learn the theoretical principles of reading terrain and weather patterns for ballistic applications, developing the intuitive understanding that made precision deflection shots possible proved to require the kind of long-term mentorship and experiential learning that didn't fit well within standard military training timelines. We've discovered that what Sergeant Chen accomplished represents a different category of expertise than what we typically develop in military training, explained Colonel Marcus Thompson, who had taken over the Sniper School's research and development program. Her capabilities weren't based on superior physical skills or advanced technology, but on knowledge systems that had been accumulated over decades through direct environmental interaction. That kind of expertise can't be downloaded or rapidly transferred. It has to be grown through experience. The realization had led to broader changes in how the military approached talent identification and development. Personnel evaluation systems were being modified to better identify individuals who possessed exceptional capabilities outside their official military specializations, and career development programs were being redesigned to provide opportunities for soldiers to explore and develop diverse expertise that might prove valuable in unexpected situations.
Chen herself had been offered various positions within special operations units and advanced training programs, but she had declined most of them, preferring to continue her intelligence analysis work while serving as an occasional consultant on marksmanship training and human performance optimization. Her reluctance to be institutionalized as a shooting specialist reflected her understanding that her capabilities were part of a larger knowledge system that couldn't be separated from her other experiences and interests. The shot in Nevada wasn't just about marksmanship, Chen explained during a lecture at the Army War College, where her case had become part of the curriculum on leadership and human potential. It was about learning to see connections between different types of knowledge, about understanding that expertise in one area can inform capabilities in completely different areas. My grandfather's wartime experiences, my intelligence analysis work, my geological interests, my understanding of atmospheric physics, all of those contributed to making that shot possible. Her perspective had begun to influence how military education approached the development of critical thinking and problem-solving capabilities. Instead of focusing exclusively on technical specialization, training programs were beginning to emphasize the kind of integrative thinking that could apply knowledge from diverse sources to novel challenges. Chen's success had demonstrated that breakthrough capabilities often emerged from the intersection of different knowledge domains, rather than from deeper specialization within single areas. The 12 snipers who had failed at the same shot had each processed the experience differently, but most had emerged with enhanced appreciation for the complexity of expertise and the importance of remaining open to alternative approaches. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had become one of the most vocal advocates for incorporating environmental awareness training into sniper education, using his experience in Nevada as a teaching example for students who might otherwise dismiss unconventional techniques. What Sergeant Chen taught us is that there's always more to learn, always different ways of seeing the same problem. The fact that she succeeded where we failed wasn't a reflection of our inadequacy. It was a demonstration that expertise comes in many different forms, and that sometimes the most important knowledge exists outside our normal training frameworks. The international snipers who had participated in the Nevada exercise had carried similar lessons back to their respective military organizations. Senior Lieutenant Petrov had implemented changes in Russian Special Forces training that emphasized environmental awareness and integrated thinking. Sergeant Major Thompson had advocated for modifications in British SAS selection and training that focused more on adaptability and creative problem-solving. Each had recognized that Chen's success represented not just individual achievement, but institutional opportunity for improved training methodologies. Dr. Martinez's ballistics research had led to significant advances in understanding projectile behavior in complex environments, with applications extending beyond military systems into various industrial and scientific applications. Her analysis of Chen's deflection shot had opened new research directions that were contributing to improvements in everything from artillery accuracy to spacecraft guidance systems. The Nevada incident taught us that our understanding of ballistic physics was more limited than we had realized. Sergeant Shen's successful shot forced us to examine assumptions about projectile behavior that we had accepted without sufficient empirical testing. The result has been advances in our theoretical understanding that have practical applications across multiple fields. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact of Chen's impossible shot was its influence on how military organizations thought about human potential and institutional learning. The incident had demonstrated that exceptional capabilities might be more widely distributed than previously recognized, but only if organizations created environments that allowed diverse expertise to emerge and be recognized. General Wells, who had overseen the investigation and analysis following the Nevada incident, had become a leading advocate for military personnel policies that emphasized individual development and capability exploration rather than rigid specialization. Her recommendations had influenced personnel management practices throughout the Department of Defense, creating new opportunities for soldiers to develop and apply expertise in unexpected areas. The lesson from Nevada, General Wells observed, is that our most valuable capabilities might not be the ones we're specifically trying to develop.
Sometimes breakthrough performance emerges from the intersection of diverse experiences and knowledge systems that can't be planned or programmed. Our job as military leaders is to create environments where those intersections can occur and be recognized when they do. The philosophical implications of Chen's achievement continue to influence military thinking about the relationship between human capabilities and technological systems. In an era of increasing automation and artificial intelligence, her success had demonstrated that certain forms of human expertise remain irreplaceable, requiring the kind of integrative thinking and environmental awareness that machines couldn't easily replicate.
2 years after the impossible shot that had challenged everything the military thought it knew about precision marksmanship, Chen had returned to her normal duties as an intelligence analyst, though her life had been permanently changed by those few seconds on a Nevada ridgeline. The shot had become legendary within military circles, discussed in training programs and case studies as an example of how exceptional individual performance could emerge from unexpected sources and challenge institutional assumptions about capability and expertise. But for Chen herself, the shot represented something more personal and profound than a demonstration of marksmanship skill. It had been a moment of perfect integration between the knowledge her grandfather had passed down, the experiences she had accumulated through her military career, and the environmental conditions that had aligned to make the impossible temporarily possible. It was a reminder that some achievements couldn't be reduced to technical analysis or systematic replication. They existed at the intersection of preparation, opportunity, and the kind of intuitive understanding that emerged from decades of patient observation and learning. The target that had defied 12 elite snipers remained in its position in the Nevada ravine, though it now bore the unmistakable mark of Chen's bullet impact. It had become an unofficial pilgrimage site for military marksmen who wanted to study the terrain and understand for themselves the complexity of the shot that had been achieved there. Most who attempted to replicate Chen's success failed, though a few had managed similar deflection shots after extensive study of her techniques and careful preparation of the environmental conditions. The facility commander had considered moving the target or modifying the terrain to prevent the distraction of personnel attempting to replicate Chen's shot, but ultimately decided to leave everything unchanged. The target had become an invaluable teaching tool, a physical reminder that some challenges required more than conventional approaches and standard solutions. It served as a monument to the possibility that individuals could transcend institutional limitations through the application of knowledge systems that existed outside normal frameworks. Chen's techniques have been studied, analyzed, and partially incorporated into various training programs, but none had been able to fully replicate the integrative approach that had made her success possible. The deflection shot principles could be taught as technical knowledge, but developing the environmental awareness and intuitive understanding that made precision deflection shots consistently achievable required the kind of long-term experiential learning that couldn't be compressed into standard military training timelines. What we learned from studying Sergeant Chen's achievement, explained Dr. Kim during a psychology conference presentation, is that exceptional performance often emerges from knowledge systems that exist outside institutional boundaries. Her success wasn't based on superior training or advanced technology, but on the application of diverse knowledge sources that had been integrated through decades of personal study and practice. The psychological research had revealed that Chen's performance under pressure had been enabled by a mindset that treated extreme challenges as interesting problems rather than threatening situations. Her approach to the impossible shot had been characterized by curiosity and systematic analysis rather than anxiety and performance pressure. This psychological framework had implications for training programs aimed at developing personnel who could perform effectively in high-stress situations across various military specializations. The broader implications of Chen's achievement continued to influence military thinking about talent development and organizational learning.
Personnel evaluation systems had been modified to better identify individuals who possessed exceptional capabilities outside their official specializations, and career development programs had been redesigned to provide opportunities for soldiers to explore diverse interests that might contribute to unexpected capabilities. But perhaps the most important lesson from the Nevada incident was that some forms of human expertise couldn't be systematized or institutionalized without losing their essential characteristics. Chen's success had required not just technical knowledge, but also the kind of personal relationship with environmental systems that developed through individual experience and couldn't be transferred through formal training programs. It was a reminder that institutions needed to maintain space for individual expertise and unconventional approaches, even when those approaches couldn't be easily understood or replicated. Chen had declined numerous offers to write books or give extensive interviews about her techniques, preferring to let her achievement speak for itself rather than becoming a celebrity within military shooting communities. She understood that attempts to commercialize or extensively publicize her methods might distort their essential characteristics, transforming experiential knowledge into marketable techniques that missed the deeper principles involved. The shot was possible because of everything that led up to it. My grandfather's teachings, my intelligence work, my personal interest in geology and physics, the specific environmental conditions that day, even the particular characteristics of that particular rifle and ammunition combination. All of those factors had to align for that moment to work. You can't separate the shot from the context that made it possible. Her observation highlighted the essential mystery that remained at the heart of her achievement. Despite extensive analysis and research, the Nevada shot continued to exist at the boundaries of what could be understood and explained through conventional means. It served as a reminder that human potential included capabilities that might always remain partially mysterious, requiring the kind of holistic development and environmental awareness that couldn't be reduced to simple formulas or training procedures. The target still gleams in the Nevada desert, marked by the impact of a bullet that shouldn't have been able to reach it, fired by someone who shouldn't have been able to make the shot, using methods that challenged everything the military thought it understood about the limits of human precision. It stands as a testament to the possibility that somewhere between mathematics and intuition, between technology and wisdom, between what we know and what we feel, there exists a space where the impossible becomes inevitable. Chen's shot had lasted perhaps 3 seconds from trigger pull to impact, but its implications continue to ripple through military training and human performance research years later. It was a reminder that individual excellence could emerge from unexpected places, that breakthrough capabilities often existed at the intersection of diverse knowledge systems, and that some achievements transcended the boundaries of what institutions could measure, analyze, or replicate. In the end, the story of 12 elite snipers who couldn't make the shot and the intelligence analyst who could became more than a tale of exceptional marksmanship. It became a story about human potential, about the power of integrative thinking, about the importance of remaining open to alternative approaches even when conventional wisdom suggested they were impossible. It was the moment when preparation met opportunity in the space between heartbeats, where physics bent to human will, and where a single bullet carried the weight of everything that had come before and everything that would follow. The impossible shot had been made, the target had been hit, and in that moment of perfect precision, the boundaries of what was possible had been permanently expanded. The desert wind still whispers through the ravine where it happened, carrying the story of the shot that changed everything, the woman who made it, and the lesson that excellence can emerge from the most unexpected places when knowledge, opportunity, and human determination align in perfect harmony. Some say that on clear desert evenings, when the light hits the ravine just at the right angle, you can still see the trajectory path that Chen's bullet followed, a ghost trail hanging in the air like a reminder that the impossible is always just one perfect shot away. Whether that's true or not, the legend persists, inspiring new generations of marksmen to push beyond the boundaries of conventional thinking and seek the kind of excellence that exists not in textbooks or training manuals, but in the space where human intuition meets environmental wisdom and creates moments of perfect, impossible precision. The target remains, the shot has been recorded, and the lesson endures. Sometimes the most important achievements come not from following established procedures, but from the courage to trust in knowledge that exists beyond institutional boundaries, to see connections that others miss, and to take the shot that everyone else believes is impossible. In a world increasingly dominated by technology and standardization, Chen's achievement stands as a reminder that human excellence still has the power to transcend every limitation we think we understand. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.